Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I'm very excited about this. And by the way, so you know who Jackie is. She's my associate on this, and she's going to keep me out of technological problems, as well as doing other things too. So this call would not exist if it were not for Jackie. There's no way I could have figured that out.
Progress.
So I think maybe put everybody on mute. I'm. It's funny. Some could hear me, and some couldn't. Anyway, I'm Rick Maurer. If you don't know me, and just got on here by friends, saying you ought to be here. And I've focused on change and support and resistance to change for over 30 years now. In 1996, I wrote a book called Beyond the Wall of Resistance, and that shifted all of my work into just being interested in why do people support us, why do they resist us. That's what I do. And what I'm welcoming you to is something brand new for me, and it's this getting the most out of the change test drive. So I hope all of you, got a copy of it. And if you didn't, at the end, there'll be some ways to get in touch with me. Just let me know that you didn't get it. And if you didn't get it, it's basically a 5-question assessment tool. So if you don't have it, you might just take a sheet of paper so you can write numbers down, and that might help as we do this work. All right, so I've been working in change for a long time. And when I first wrote that book in '96, there were not a lot of good resources. There were some. But today there are tons of good resources. In the room behind me, which you cannot see, I've got a couple shelves filled with books and articles and tools for managing and leading change and leading projects. And I mean, some of them are not very good. Most of them are good to very good. And yet, the odd thing is, I keep hearing the same complaints from people about change. The same questions I was hearing back in the mid-90s of why don't people get it? What's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? And so as I looked at all of those tools, I started to realize there's probably nothing wrong with these tools. There's some really good stuff there. And the problem is somewhere else. And Jackie, could we go to the first, actually beyond the title slide, could we go to the second slide of the cake? Okay, well, while she's setting it up, that often if things aren't working, we think, well, we need a new plan. We need something new. And I'm a fan of looking at new things too, but I think it sometimes is seductive and actually gets in the way of what we're doing. And perfect. All right. So this is a Black Forest cake, and I think they're delicious cakes. And as you can see, there's a lot of different stuff going on, from chocolate filling to chocolate chips to cherries to on and on and on. And I could start getting hungry right now. Well, a number of years ago, my dad was coming up on a big birthday, and I thought, why don't I drive out to Ohio and make this cake for him? So I thought, great. So I had a recipe book. I took it. I bought all the ingredients. I made the cake. And it didn't look anything at all like the cake we were just looking at. I mean, it looked like kind of a mound of stuff. I mean, good tasting stuff, but still kind of a mound of stuff. And it tasted okay, but it didn't taste the way I remembered it when I was visiting the Black Forest. And so I could have said, well, there was a mistake in the recipe. Clearly, there's a typo somewhere. Or when you see that picture, oh, that was just Photoshop. That's not real. But my mom and dad and Kathy knew differently. The problem wasn't with the recipe, and it wasn't with the photo. It was with the baker. So here's a guy, me, trying to bake a cake, and I've never baked a cake in my life before, and I'm expecting it to come out okay. And I think we do that with big projects, that we've got the recipe, we got the plan, and then we assume, oh, we got the plan, let's just do it. And often there's other things that need to happen, and that's what I really want to talk about today. And could we get the screen so that we see the slides and see me as well? Right now I see you, Jackie, and maybe everybody else can see me.
We
So,
can see him.
Hey, Rick, it's because I'm sharing the screen. That's why you don't see yourself.
oh, okay.
So that's why if you were sharing the screen that you would see yourself.
Okay, so can I share the screen?
You can, yep.
All right, so here, will you stop the, yes. Do you want to continue? Well, that doesn't help. Now I just got a bunch of junk. Where do I see I don't see the slides to share.
Do you have PowerPoint open, Rick?
Do I have what open?
PowerPoint?
I do not have PowerPoint open.
Okay, you'll have to have PowerPoint open and your slides show up.
Okay, let's just not do it. Let's go back to my sharing it with you.
Okay.
Okay. I need to do something, right?
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So what I want to do here is talk about this change test drive. And the idea behind the test drive is that it's not, let's go to the next slide, please. The test drive is not a new change management plan. It's a way of looking at your plan before you start, just like you might test drive a new car. It's also a thing to do if you're stuck in the middle. It might be able to tell you why you're stuck, but it has the elements of a plan, but it is not a plan itself. So I want to be real clear about that. And we've got somebody on YouTube now. All right. So what I would like you to do is, if you haven't done it already, just rate yourself on each of these 5 items as I go through them. And I'll be going through, relatively slowly, so you can do that. And then I'm going to ask you to put those scores in maybe we have a survey box or chat room or something, and just see how everybody scores. It will all be anonymous. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, and so what you're going to do is rate each one of these on a scale of 1 to 5, and 5 is high. That means, yeah, we do that really well. A 1 is, we don't do that at all. And the 3 is kind of so-so, but that so-so or that average is actually quite dangerous when it comes to a change. It's what you need is you need something up in the 4 or 5, because the danger of a 3 is maybe we'll get people involved, maybe we'll do those kind of things when it's convenient. And so there's kind of a, well, yeah, if there's time, we'll do that. And that's the problem with the 3. It's just not a very firm kind of commitment. Okay, so could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the first essential, and this is where you got the 1 to 5 scale, is what you need there is leaders are going to determine how important this change is. And so by the leaders, I'm talking about you alone or you with a few colleagues. That somebody says, we've really got to do something. Either it's a great opportunity or it's a great challenge. And pardon me, I just got ahead of myself. That this small group of people needs to say, yeah, this is really important. We know it's important. And this is before you ever mention it to anybody else. And then you start talking about, all right, if it's important, what resources are we going to need from beginning to end? Resources might be money, equipment, access to things, those kind of things. I didn't put people in here because I'm going to talk about them next. All right. And this small group, before you ever go live, needs to make a commitment to the success of this project. Or else you get into real problems. And I want to go to the next slide, please, and talk about some of the risks. Okay. Sometimes one of the risks here is we start this thing, and I'll say, well, is it a high priority? Oh, yeah, it's top priority. And in some organizations, everything seems to be top priority, and that could be a real problem unless you have unlimited resources, and I don't know anybody who does. So it's important to say just how important is this, and when will it take a back seat to something else? And then another thing is we don't know how to provide the kind of resources we're going to need to do this thing. But I want to tell you about a big risk in this one area, because this one area might be really simple. I mean, you and a couple of people are sitting down and you could just go through that in 2 minutes, and that would be great. Let's see here. But I heard a story last week from a couple of people I really respect. And they got a call from a Fortune 100 company, and they said, we've got this project, a big change. This has been going on, I think, for over a year, and we're just not making progress. And so they called these guys in, and they looked around, they talked to a lot of people, looked at stuff, and they said, you have made no progress in the last year, and you've already spent $120 million. But people don't know what's going on. They're confused when you give them instructions. Our suggestion is that you just stop the project. It's that bad. Well, they didn't stop it right there. They waited a few more months and they finally stopped the project. But this is only after having spent $200 million on something that they really could have solved some of those problems if they had just sat down at the beginning and said, all right, we're going to do this. Who's got to be involved? How do they have to be involved? That sort of thing. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. All right. This is the pardon me, just go ahead and score that on a 1 to 5. How, either how you do or how a particular change in your organization does. And nobody's going to see your particular score, so you can say whatever you want. All right, the second essential is identify the support you're going to need from others. Now, I could have put that in with the first essential, but I think it's so important and it gets overlooked so often that's why I wanted people to actually have to sit down and say, so what kind of support are we going to need from people? And anticipate where you're going to need that energy and forward momentum, and identify places where it might be difficult to get that level of support. And then decide how you can avoid, those pitfalls. Okay. Could you go to the second slide here? All right, so now we're looking at the risks. In some organizations, people give lip service to support and engagement. And they say, oh, yeah, it's really important. They say all the right words. In fact, I used to start, when I would be working on big projects, I have 2 questions for the people. And the first one is the one I want to tell you. Scale of 1 to 5, how important is it going to be for you to build strong support? And almost always people answered 4 or 5. But in reality, a lot of them their practice was kind of a 3 or maybe even a 2. So people know the right words to say, but something's getting in the way, and they're not doing it if they're not using it. And the final risk, and there's more than just 3 risks, by the way, is it's hard to know if people are really with you or not. And I was talking with a CEO a while back, and he had come up with this idea. I think it was for quality improvement. And he said, I would go out on the floor and I'd say, hey, how's it going? And people would go, oh, it's going great. And I would go on down to someplace else and they go, hey, it's going fine. Go to the next building, it's going fine. He said, it took me 2 months to realize that all I was getting was malicious compliance. People were doing just enough so that I would keep walking down the hall. And now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but my hunch is that all of us have been in situations where we weren't really fully committed and we were just giving lip service to the thing. Right before COVID, I was working on a project and I wasn't on that day. I was a participant I was walking into the room with an executive and he said, so Rick, what do you think we're going to do today? Rearrange priorities or fill in templates? And you could just hear the sarcasm and cynicism coming out of his mouth. So when I'm talking about support, and it's the energy we need to make this thing going. Okay, so give yourself a score on that, or give your organization a score. How well they do that on some particular kind of change. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Here is people need to grasp what it's going to take. And I put that actually in a couple of categories. In the first category is the technical skills. So let's say it's a change where you need, you're building a jet engine, for instance. It's really helpful if people understand jet engines. If you're doing a new cost accounting process, it's good if people understand the principles of accounting and what you need to do. And usually with changes, we do a pretty good job with the technical part. The human skills are what you're going to need to get people interested and committed to this project, to this change. Okay? And sometimes we do a great job. Like I said, I've got a couple shelves of really good resources back there. But I find this one sometimes missing, but missing in a surprising way. And Jackie, could you go to the next slide, please? Oh, excuse me, go back. I missed the, yeah, go back to the last one. Didn't write down the risks on that one because I had just one big one there. What I find is that quite often we have training for people, and it can be good training, but it's sometimes too much training. I'll give you an example. And this has happened to me a couple times. I get invited to come in and present the stuff I developed on resistance and support. And, you know, they'll invite me in for half a day or a day. That's fine. But then the next day, they're inviting in somebody else who also has a change management idea or plan. And then they might have somebody who's talking about decision making and somebody else who talks about decision making in a different way and all of that kind of stuff. And what is this? I'm sorry, I got a weird notice on my screen. The courses have too much. If it was a college survey course and we're saying we're going to learn a lot about change management, you know, here's Rick Maurer's model and here's that model and here's this other, and we're going to do some work on influence, you know, and here's what Cialdini has to say, and here's what the other people. For a college course, that is fine, but what you want is you want people to be able to focus so that you have a single way to talk about the change, rather than each department or each region has its own language and its own stuff. Okay? So there's one other aspect that doesn't get talked about much in this grasp what it takes. And please go to the next slide. Okay. This is an elegant little equation by Kurt Lewin. And if you don't know Kurt Lewin, he really was one of the founders of really looking at how we work with each other in groups and in organizations. And I say he really, as far as I know, was maybe the first one to write about that kind of stuff. Very powerful stuff. But this simple little equation I think, is very important. Behavior is a function of the people and their environment. And too often, we look at behavior as how an individual is doing. And so our performance appraisal systems quite often really err on the side of rating individuals for better or for worse. So if something goes wrong, we blame the individual, and that person saying, but wait a minute, you got all the stuff to me too late. You didn't give me the budget you promised. Now you're just a complainer. Or if you do it well and you get all these accolades for, let's say, sales, there's no mention of the people who actually made it possible for you to get those sales and make that money. And so just paying attention to culture, not in some touchy-feely way, but in how that has an impact on behavior. You know, there are some organizations, there's a guy named Al Dunlap, and he had the unfortunate nickname of Chainsaw Al. And that was, he had this reputation of just downsizing, just wiping away things. All right. So he would not be somebody that would probably be paying attention to the environment. He would look at what wasn't working, what was working, and he'd go, bam, and here's what we're going to do. And it may have worked for him. It generally does not work. So go ahead and score yourself. How well do you do in making sure that the people working on this change have the fundamentals to do the work? Okay, could we go on to the next slide, please? Oh, excuse me, I messed up. I already did those, so you can go to the next slide. All right, so the fourth essential, and this one is overlooked almost all the time. And if it's not being overlooked where you are, then that's absolutely great. And to experiment and refine means you have an opportunity to learn the skills safely. You get to practice and hone the skills in something that my colleagues call safe emergencies. You know, imagine that you just came out of a change management course and your boss says, "Hey, how was the course? That was a week, wasn't it?" And he says, "Oh, yeah, it was great. I loved it." He said, "Okay, well, wonderful. Got a big meeting coming up next Wednesday, and I want you to facilitate it." And you go, "Well, yeah, good." And they say, because you learned stuff about facilitation. And your boss says, "All right, we've invited in the leaders from all the regions and some of their top people. So we're going to have maybe 350 people in the room. And we've got about 4 hours for this. So what we'd like you to do is facilitate in a way that everybody gets involved. They can talk about their concerns, their hopes. And at the end of the morning, we really come up with some sort of plan that can really make things go. And hey, I'm counting on you. If you need any help with handouts, I'm always there." You know, unless your ego is through the roof, you're probably going, "Oh, I just learned stuff. I never had a chance, to try it out. What's going on?" So I want to tell you about when I was learning to telemark ski. Could you go back to the next slide, please? All right, that's not me, but it could have been me. I was out with friends going cross-country skiing, and at the little shack they have where they have coffee and that, and you can rent equipment, it said telemark lessons, tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And telemark is where you use cross-country skis, but do the maneuvers that a downhill ski does. And I thought, I would love to learn that. So I go to the lesson. I'm nervous. I've never done this before. And we're on one hill, but it's not an earth-shattering hill. I mean, it's a hill. It definitely, if you stand up, it's going to take you down. And so the teacher would teach us something, and I would try to do it. And inevitably, I would fail, and he'd ski over to where I was lying down, and he would give me advice. And by the end of the morning, I was actually doing it pretty well. But the thing about it is it was a practice slope. It was a place where I could try things out, and if I fell, I didn't get hurt. I don't know if this guy got hurt or not, but let's say he didn't. And so it's a chance, and you're not worried about blocking somebody else from their speeding down the trail. It's a place where you can learn, and I think that kind of stuff is essential when we're talking about change. That people need a way to practice before they try to facilitate a meeting of 350 people. There's a positive organizational example that I would like to tell you about right now. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, this is Reginald Revens, and I don't like to read what's on slides, but there can be no learning without action and no action without learning. He is a young man who was invited to work at the Cavendish labs, which were kind of the scientific research part of Cambridge University. And he said the big people there, lots of them had Nobel Prizes. Lots of them had worldwide reputations. And he said, and every Wednesday afternoon they would have a tea. It's a very British thing to have tea. And he said, but there was a ground rule for being there. You could not come in and brag. All right? You could only speak if you had a problem. And he said, when somebody had a Nobel Prize in physics saying, folks, I'm struggling with this thing. Egos and degrees start to melt away because they're there to help each other. And he started to notice what an enriching conversation would take place every Wednesday afternoon. And he went on to develop something called action learning. And now other people use the term, but the way he looked at it is people ought to be learning the skills while they're on the job. And so I'm not going to go into all the details of what he did, but imagine that you're taking a class on decision making. All right. So it might be common that you go to a bunch of classes and you do case studies and role plays and that. And he suggested something different. That this team that put together is actually working on a real project. No simulation. It's a real project. And so you want to be good at it. So it's real. But the overarching thing there is we want to learn about decision making. So you're literally learning on the job. I love that as an approach, and I wish we did it more with change. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. Oh, actually, back up, please. I went too fast. Excuse me. A big mistake is that we push people and change. They're working on things, and they get the training, and they go right out and have to do it, and things just fail that way. I'll just tell you a quick story. When I got done studying all this kind of stuff, I got hired by a state Department of Education, and they said, we've got a department where management and labor just do not like each other. And we'd like to have an offsite where they start working together. And I'm thinking, well, this will be great. I would love to do that. And so I'm talking to my clients. Never occurred to me to actually talk to them, to the people who are going to be there. I walk in the room, and it's a room that has about 70 people in it, half union, half management. And it was crowded too. And I was on a stage. And so we did the typical kind of introductory things. And then you could start to feel the heat go up, at least the emotional heat go up. And people started pointing at each other. And being a young man, I'm thinking, oh, that's great. That's exactly what's supposed to be happening here. And it's getting worse and worse. And then the most amazing thing happened. They stopped pointing fingers at each other and started pointing fingers at me. Mr. and Mrs. Maurer's boy. I mean, what did I do? And they're just letting me have it. And I'd had lots of practice in workshops. I'd never had practice doing that with that kind of pressure. So fortunately, it became time for a break. And I'd had the good sense to hire the most experienced consultant who I personally knew at the time, a guy named Lloyd Richards. And he's just over there smiling. And I walk off the stage, and he said, "So how's it going?" And I said, "What do you mean, how's it going? This thing is going to hell in a handbasket. It's awful." And he said, "No, it's not." I said, "Well, you could see what's going on, couldn't you?" And he said, "Yeah, I could see it. Rick, there's been a storm brewing for a very long time, and now all those storm clouds come together in this little room, and they're hitting, and the lightning is forming, and lightning wants to hit the highest point. Rick, you're the highest point. So you're going to be taking it. Whether it's your fault or not, you're going to be taking it." He said, "You got a choice. Right now, you're standing there like an old oak tree, and every time the lightning hits, you just react. It's like Kramer on Seinfeld or something. I mean, it's just this, incredible, awful thing." He said, "Or you could stand there like a lightning rod and just let it go through you. And some of it might fit for you, some of it might not, but it's allowing them to get that stuff out." That saved me. That happened over 40 years ago, and I still remember that story. And it's a shame that I had to learn it on the job, but even having Lloyd there really helped me learn and actually save that retreat. I mean, without that, I think I would have gotten so defensive and then angry, and some of the language I learned being in the Army, I probably would start throwing that out. So anyway, that's number 4. Go ahead and score yourself how your organization does on experimenting and refining. By the way, we're going to have time for question and answers in just a few minutes. Could you go to the next slide, please? All right. The 5th essential is embedding best practices. And quite often we declare victory too soon. When in fact, if we're going to make something a success, we got to keep monitoring the progress and keep tweaking. And we have to make a commitment to continuous improvement. Okay? I want to give you a couple of examples of this. Some of you may be old enough to remember when personal computers were first brought into organizations as a real tool. And at the time, they were very expensive. People got training. And often, excuse me, the computers, they came with manuals, not just a little manual. I mean, you would have 2 or 3 manuals. And the idea was people would learn how to use the computers, and then they would start using the computers for various kinds of tasks, and it would be so much more efficient. But instead, people just saw all the hassle. Gee, is that in manual number 1 or number 2? And all right, so but if I'm talking to that person, maybe I need to go to manual 3. It's just too much stuff, And Ken Blanchard, famous management thinker and writer, said the personal computer has become the world's most expensive paperweight. People found ways of getting around it, and that's one of the problems. And I'll give you another organizational example. I was talking to a leader about kind of the steps that I use in working on change. And she was great. And she said, each thing I mentioned, she said, oh, yeah, we're doing that well, and gave me stories. So I said, well, are you making a good case for change? Excuse me, I got something in my throat. And she, oh, yeah, we're making great change. Here's what we've done. And I said, well, how about the planning? And we get really talented people with the planning, we do this and that, and then we hand it off really neatly to the people implementing, and that goes really well. And then she got silent, but there was still another stage. And I said, what's going on? And she said, the last stage where you're embedding what it takes, where you're getting value, we never even look at that. We measure how well we implemented. Did we come in on time, on budget? Did people get the training they need? Did we get the bugs out of the system? And she said, clearly, that's really important stuff to measure. But we don't measure, did we get value from the thing? It was, an easy thing to overlook. And I started thinking, that happens in a lot of places. People say, wow, it's April 16th. We're going to go live. Boy, am I glad that's over. What's my next project? Yeah. So please go ahead and score yourself on that. And Jackie, would you go to the next slide, please? All right. Actually, for this one, let's turn it back to me so I can just see people and they can see me. Can you do that, or do I need to do that? Huh. Everybody still hear me?
Yeah, and I could see you when you were presenting, Rick.
Really?
Oh, yes.
Well, that must have been a treat. That's yeah. Good. Thank you. I'm glad. Okay. So, if you have well, actually, let me, Jackie. If has anybody been writing questions in? I realize I didn't invite people to do that, but they might have.
We've only had really one question that came in, Rick, and that was from Andreas, and he said, how will real commitment, what will that sound like, look like?
I don't want to overstate this, but when I experience it, you can just hear their tone of voice as they talk about it. There's an excitement. There's that notion of flow. It's like, wow, this is really important. This is good. We're committed to doing this, and it just looks so different than what I often see. Now, often I don't get called into places that are doing great. That's not why they called me in. So I have a bit of a bias there. But when I do get to talk with people where things are going great, it's just, you can hear the tone of voice. They want to show you. I remember a guy wanting to show me a drone that his group had created that saved lots of lives, and you could just hear the excitement. He didn't have to do that. We were on a break right then. He said, "Oh, hey Rick, I want to show you something." That you get people just, I don't know, they're out of their skins kind of with excitement. I maybe, even if it's not quite that far, that's what I get. And one thing I look for is peak performance, and there's been a lot of research on that. But if I say to you, wherever your project is, what would peak performance look like? And you're able to tell me that, that's a really good answer for that question. Or sometimes, this is kind of radical, I actually ask them, so what do you think of what you're working on? And I really am surprised, still surprised, delighted that I can ask a question like that to an individual and I generally get an honest answer. If I do it in a group of 70, no, there's a political environment. They don't want to look bad. They don't want to, a lot of things. But if people know me enough to even start to trust me, quite often they'll tell me what's going on. So I hope that was a good answer. Anybody else has a question? Just unmute yourself and
Rick,
yeah,
Rick, I have one.
yeah.
In looking at collaboration, my program involves 5 pieces of that. One is expectations, resources, expertise, schedules, and then the 5th is commitment. What you caused me to think about this morning that I hadn't thought about was that I have been approaching commitment on the basis of the team members themselves. But I wonder what would happen if I asked them to rate the commitment they think they're getting from their management and or their stakeholders. And I think maybe just from listening this morning, I think maybe I want to add those 2 categories as well. What do you think?
I think first of all, I like those categories you just listed. First of all, the people you are asking about commitment, I think is absolutely on target. But I would also, looking at the people they report to, and do they have that same commitment? And that doesn't mean that they're coming to all the meetings. But and let me just tell a quick story. There's Deloitte and Touche started a thing called the Women's Initiative back in the 90s, and they were hiring 50-50 out of college, 50% men, 50% women. But when it came up to picking partners, there were very few women left. And they started to look at that and they said, this isn't a good place for them to work. It's hard to have a family because you're on the road all the time, and da 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 da. And they made this commitment to work on it. But and they didn't. I won't go into the whole story. I'll be glad to talk to you sometime about the stuff they did. But one of the things was they knew the chairman, a guy named Mike Cook, was 100% committed to this. And it's not that he was on any of the committees, but he made it his special thing. So it wasn't over in human resources. It was this right there. And there's a story, and it may not even be a true story, that he flew from headquarters in Connecticut to Tulsa, Arizona. For those of you not in the United States, 2,000 miles probably, maybe a little more. He did it just to kick off a planning meeting of the Women's Initiative Group. And now he had to know that whatever words he had were not all that important. Somebody else could have come or he could have done a video. But the fact that he got on a plane and went there, that made a difference. So I'm a fan of having the leaders have to be committed as well.
Hey, Rick.
Yeah.
This is Abby. I have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, what did you do at the offsite after Lloyd's comment to you? So you let them vent, and then what? How did you get them to move forward?
I called my mommy. That's a good question. What I did and what I still do, why I still remember it, is I shut up. I know enough about how to listen, but in that moment I was being attacked, or in my view I was being attacked. And so I allowed that image to be there of just being a lightning rod. And there was nothing mystical about it. I wasn't chanting something, but just that they would start to attack and I would just take it in. And sometimes what they were saying was absolutely true, where I could just agree with them. But I really what helped me do it is not be defensive and actually try to listen. Whether I agreed with them or not, just listen. That was the big thing.
So thank you for that. But aside from that, so in the experience of working with a team where there's very low trust, and so when we reflect back to the team of, so here's what I'm noticing. You all said you're committed to improving the way you're working together, but I'm noticing that that's not happening. What would you all like to do about that? But in an environment of low trust, no, you're shaking your head no.
No, I'm sorry. I've been there. So please continue.
Yeah, so what do you do in an environment of low trust and you're asking them, okay, folks, what would you like to do about this?
There's there's a technique that I've used halfway, and it's really good. Chris Argyris, who was okay, and for anybody who doesn't know, he was a master at working with executive groups, and he talked about in meetings there are undiscussables, things that could have a real impact on the meeting, but nobody talks about them, you know. And so they can go through this meeting as if it's a well-scripted play, and it looks like, you know, this kabuki drama is actually something is happening when in fact the real stuff is underground. And so I was listening to a client. We were off at a retreat, and I got there early, and they said, "Hey, the senior group is going to be in a meeting. You're welcome to just come in and listen." So I'm listening to the meeting, and these are all people I knew. And I thought, wow, this is a productive meeting. I was amazed. We take a break, and I'm in the men's room, and one of the guys turns to me and goes, "Are we hopeless or what?" And he tells me stuff. And out in the hall, I ran into one of the women, and she said, "Rick, what are you going to do?" You know, in the meeting, it sounded great. So I called them all together. We had a dinner that night, and I said, "Look, a bunch of you said that meeting was a waste of time. If you're interested, I'd just like to talk with you at lunch tomorrow. Let's not mess up the banquet." And they said, "Sure." So I said, "Look, I'm not going to ask you to do this Chris Argyris thing, and I'm going to tell you what it is, by the way. I just talked about it." And I started talking about it, and one of the vice presidents said, "Okay, here's what I'm not discussing." And I've had that happen other places. Now, if they wouldn't discuss, I am not going to push that. That's just not my style. And by the way, what Argyris would do, there's some steps to it, so you could look it up. But basically, and I did this with a group one time, and I said, "Look, this meeting's been going on a while, and I'm getting bored." Which is, I tend to tell people if I'm getting bored in that. And I said, "I really wonder if you're really talking about what's important. And if everybody take a sheet of paper, you can jot down stuff, and I'm not going to ask you to talk about it or anybody else to see it. Are there things in this meeting that you haven't said that could have had an impact on the meeting? Like if you're thinking, oh, I got to remember to pick up milk, that's not something we need to know about." And people started writing. And then I started telling the Chris Argyris story, and somebody said, "I'd like us to put our stuff up on the board." And other people go, "Yeah." So suddenly I'm putting up on the board stuff that was unsafe to talk about 10 minutes ago, you know? So anyway, so I really like giving people the option. I never like to push people away from where they are, but I do like to kind of shine a light on what's going on. Is that helpful?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, very nice. Thanks.
I think we have we have time for one more question. And before I get to that, there is a chat function. If you still have questions, write them in there. And I don't think we'll have time today. I will put together probably a short video and address as many of those questions as I can. So, and I can do that over the next couple of days. So if you have questions, please put them in. I would love to hear them. Anybody, we have time for one more question.
I'll go.
Okay, great.
So, Rick, thank you. What if you have, air quotes, the right leaders positionally, but they don't have the right mindset and capabilities? And, that can come from inner issues that, people have not yet dealt with.
Yeah, so what's the question?
So, what if you have the right leaders positionally, but they don't have the right mindset and capabilities?
I assume this is not hypothetical. Okay, so basically, what's your relationship with them? Do they trust you?
So this example was in a project that had a system integrator, and I was working with the system integrator.
Yeah.
And the lead just was very kind of stuck in what he was going to do. He was like Captain Ahab. He's going down with the whale. And the project actually, it was a $50 million state project. 2 years after I left, it was closed down. So
Okay.
a horrible repercussion.
Okay.
Because
okay. I just need to stop you because I can't get into a lot of nuances other than, so what was your relationship with him? Did he trust you to be honest with him?
No.
Okay, then I'm not sure what you can do.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Okay.
okay, so if I probably would, I might say something like, hey, I'm just going to use your name, Karen, and just say, Karen, I know we don't know each other well, or we haven't worked together that much. I'm not going to say, you probably don't trust me, but but I'm noticing something. Are you interested in hearing it? Something I think might be getting in the way. And if he says no, that's the answer. Uh, but most people are going to go, well, yeah, tell me about it. And he might get really defensive. He might not. But at least you've said what you need to say. And if he's at all interested in it, he said, all right, so what would you suggest? Or then you have an opening to take it further. But I don't. My own self, some other people on this call might go, no, I'd really go in. And I think that could work really well. It's just not my style.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. Thanks.
Right. So what I want to do is I want to tell you why I put this webinar together and kind of the new orientation for my work. And I'd like to take about 5 minutes to do that. But I want to, but I just want to make sure that's okay to take 5 minutes to do that. Could I just see some head nods or thumbs down? I see some. Okay. All right. So the people I can see are all going, yes. I'm not working on big change projects anymore. I'm not against that. I really admire the people who do it. I just don't want to do it. And what I do like, and I learned this over COVID, is I can get a lot done with clients using Zoom. I realize Zoom can be used in some terrible ways that just sap all the energy out of your soul. But I think they can also, work effectively. I hope this call is working effectively. So I really started looking at, all right, what are the people that seem to be interested in my work? What do they need? What might interest them, and what would interest me in return? And what I came up with is a way of doing coaching with education in the background, but coaching one-on-one with people. So I still will do group work, but what I'm talking about now is every one of these is one-on-one, and I'm just going to give you a highlight of all three of these, and then if you want more info, there'll be a slide up that'll show you how to get that and how to have a conversation with me. But the first thing is it's just one. I don't have a good title for it, but it's one of those things, where you go, God, there was always somebody to talk to. I have a buddy, Max Stark, in Cleveland. We studied together at the Stone Institute of Cleveland, and we became coaches for each other. But often he'd be driving to a meeting, and he said, "You got time for drive-by coaching?" And we would talk. Or, sometimes I called him and I said, "I'm having this problem," and he said, "Rick, you remember that problem you had last month?" And I go, "Yeah." He said, "You're doing it again." And we had the kind of relationship where we had enough common information about working with people and that we could and we liked each other, we could just cut through. What I'm thinking of is a session like that where somebody has a meeting coming up next Wednesday. I'm not talking about a big, it could be a big meeting, but it's something that, man, I'm really afraid it's going to go on me or whatever it might be. So this is, we'd have a phone meeting, we'd talk about that, I'd do some coaching, you'd go do the work, and then maybe we'd have a brief follow-up call just to see how it went and where you go from there. That would be the first one. The second option is focusing on a challenge, a bigger challenge that you face. And I've got three that you would pick for any one of these. And one is like, how do we make a compelling case for change? It's really hard to do that, and you could say, and then we'll have like 3 sessions together over the course of, maybe 3 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever. And I will also have a resource library that I can say, hey, I think it might be a good idea if you read such and such and such and such, or if you used this tool. But basically, I'm not teaching during those calls. It's a coaching and advising session. So, and the 3 topics are, how do I make a compelling case for change? The second one is, how do I avoid a big bang approach to change? Those are the changes that start out really strong and then just die just as quickly. And I remember when I was first coming up with this, I was talking to a group of engineers and they started laughing. And I said, am I exaggerating? And they said, no, this happens to us every week. And then the third one is avoiding a change on life support. I think there's a lot of projects and organizations that just have enough energy to survive, but even if it makes it to the end, it wasn't worth all the effort. That malicious compliance story I told earlier is an example of that kind of thing. It's just going along. So if you were interested in doing it, say, hey, I want to work on that one. And then we would come up with a format, but it would be 3 calls and unlimited email support for this thing too. And then the final one, which is really a comprehensive thing, where I'm really trying to give people virtually everything I know about support and resistance. And so that you could go out there and you could look at a situation and go, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, here's what the options are, that kind of thing. And so that one I'm thinking might be like 8 sessions, so it might be spread out for 3 months or 4 months, but it would be a chance to do stuff, try. And the big thing that I would do on these last 2 is I really want people to make transformations while we're working together. So the notion of safe emergencies, to go out and try it out safely so you don't lose your job, and come back and say, how'd it go? What did you learn? And I love that way of learning. I just think it's just a good thing. At any rate, those are the 3, and if you're interested more about it, I will be glad to send you something. So Jackie, can we go? I think it's the next slide. I hope it's the next slide. That's it. All right. So a couple ways to do this. The one that I recommend is just use this QR code, and you could use it right now. I'm amazed I don't know how they work, but they seem to work. And just schedule a 30-minute call with me, and we can talk about sort of what's next for you. And the what's next for you might involve me and my work, or it might be something else that related to what we're talking about today, and that would be perfectly fine. If you know me at all, you know that I am not a born salesperson, and I'm not going to be pushing things. So if you're interested in that call, I can do, we could set it up. I've got, I don't know, maybe 10 times slots. I'm not quite sure this week. And then next week I'm working in Finland. And then the week after that, I've got some time. But the what next is, I like it because it really is talking about, all right, where are you now? Where do you want to be? All of that. And actually, could we keep that slide up again? Just for a minute more. Okay, well, it'll get up in time. But if you don't want to have the conversation, you say, no, I'm just not ready to do something different right now, but I'm really interested in those options. Send me an email, and you can see the email address, Rick Maurer, nothing fancy about it. And just make sure you spell Maurer, M-A-U-R-E-R. It has different spellings in different parts of the world. And I'd be glad to send you the write-up when it gets done. Jackie and I are working on it like right now. And my hope is that I'll have something that I could send out, by tomorrow morning. And so, okay, I think we can take that screen down. So just a couple minutes. What did you learn today? If anything, all you have to do is unmute yourself.
Okay, Rick, Andreas, yeah.
Yes.
I'm thinking, overall, I'm thinking that your approach is very proactive. You're trying to identify the obstacles in front of the project before you start the project, right?
Exactly.
And that's valuable. And then I went meta, and I'm thinking about the change that we are trying to do. And I need to do some thinking about this. The biggest question is, what, in your mind, in your opinion or in your experience, Rick, have you seen change that is so difficult to do that it's impossible?
Yes.
Okay.
I hate to say impossible, because sometimes we're talking about generations. I'm tempted to get out onto the world stage, and I'm not going to do that. Let me stick with organizations. Um, I, I can't think of examples that I would be able to talk about that need to be an example that was, already in the media. But yeah, I've seen where the fights, sometimes fights between management and labor, but sometimes between different specialties in the organizations were just so intense that they ended up, failing.
Yeah, and then I guess it's better to recognize that up front than trying to whip a dead horse, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of being cautiously optimistic. So I might try some things, but the beating of the dead horse thing, we need to know when not to do that. I want to quote one of my favorite philosophers, a guy named Kenny Rogers, and I think he wrote a song called Need to Know When to Hold 'em, When to Fold 'em, and When to Walk Away. And I think that is true for those of us who do this kind of work. I mean, there's sometimes you hold the cards and you go, man, this is great. This is a great relationship. Sometimes the timing's not right. I don't have the right cards, but I'm still staying here. And other times I just don't belong here, And I know a lot of people say, I wish I had taken my own, they knew that they didn't belong there, but they kept trying to make a difference in a place that didn't want to have a difference made. So, okay. How about time for one more question, then we'll call it a day.
Hey, so Rick, Ken, one of the interesting things about your framework is that it provides, a great place for a collaborative session. I'm kind of curious, do you feel like it's also applicable in situations where you're dealing with upper management and trying to get them to recognize that a change is going to have problems, is going to be an issue, and you're dealing with kind of, ladders, so you're not in one big meeting with a bunch of executives. You've got one VP, as SVP, and EVP, and a CEO or whatever. And so I'm kind of trying to think about that. So it sounds like, yes, you're shaking your head. That seems like plausible.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of hassle. Hassle you got to have if you want to influence up. I'll tell you one story I hope is good. I was working with a person who ran a plant, and they were going to lose a major customer simply because of technological changes, nothing they did wrong, and they were going to lose it in a few years. And they said, but this person said, I want to start planning for that now. Like, what are we going to do? It's a radical shift. And I said, well, let's get some information from the people where you work. And this person said, everybody's happy. They know what's going on. And I never quite trust that. And I said, let me just do a quick survey. Well, it turns out this person was right. People knew what was going on. They were scared that was going to happen to us, but they trusted the leaders in that room. And some people said this was the best, plant leader I've ever had. But when I was talking to the senior group, the plant leader said, but the problem is corporate headquarters. And if they say, okay, that doesn't mean much. But if one of them comes to the meeting and kicks off the meeting, they're on board. So we had the planning meeting. They invited somebody and said, hey, I want to let you know, I'll call the person Becky, that we are 100% behind what Becky is doing and you're doing. And they can't stop themselves saying all this stuff. And they had the support they needed. So sometimes it's really looking at, all right, what will work in this culture and who can I get to? But it's not easy. There's no trick to do that. So, okay. Hey, I want to thank everybody for being here. If you had a question and you put it in the chat function, great. If you didn't put it there, then send me an email, Rick Maurer, and I would be glad to try to respond. And what I will do with the questions is I'll wait till I've got a bundle, if it's a bundle, and I'll send something out within the next 2 days. So thank you all for being here. It really meant a lot to have you here. So thanks again. Bye-bye.